Welcome to Backyard Cigars. So glad that you could join me again. I want to present today three little cigars. Little cigars as they were once known. Small cigars as we know them now. Tiny vitolas that provided satisfaction and a savings for your bottom line. Now these three cigars had their own impact in their own time. And I just want to show them to you and let you know what I have learned about these three little cigars. Now, these three little cigars are vintage cigars. You can't purchase them anymore. Well, maybe you can. Some of them can probably be found on vintagecigarstore.com, but I'm not sure if they have them in stock. These are cigars that I've had for quite some time, a couple months, give or take, in the humidor at RH levels of 64 to 65. I'm not giving them a pre-rinse. I just want to share with you the little bit of history that I have accumulated for each one and the impact that they provided for not only the cigar industry, but for the cigar smoker himself and herself. And here we have the three cigars. From oldest to latest, this cigar here is dated sometime between 1891 and 1903. I'm going to go on record as to say that this is probably an early 1900s version. This cigar here is probably from the early to mid 1940s. And this cigar here, probably from the late 60s to the early 1970s. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, but I'm going to start off with this one first. Now, this is the Carmenita, aka Carmencita, Regalia, Elegantes. This little cigar here was manufactured by the Brown Brothers Cigar Company. And they started a cigar business sometime in the late 1800s. And by 1891, they were being recognized as the largest tobacco company west of New York City. Now, they were headquartered in Detroit. And in 1899, Brown Brothers and a few other companies were the target of Attorney General Crow, who filed a suit in the Supreme Court to break up a suspected tobacco trust that allowed these companies to control the output and price of plug tobacco. And in breaking up the suspected trust, I can't say whether or not they won in court or lost in court, but they went back to court, and in 1899, they were in court over an issue with a competitor that used to be a salesman with the Brown Brothers Company. They went to court over the fact that the defendant in the case, the former employee, was releasing a brand similar in name to their famous brand name Carmencita cigar. In the court documents, it lists the name Carmenita, not Carmencita. But the exact copy of the transcript in 1900 does not list the name Carmenita, instead Carmencita. So while they ended up losing that case, it is clear that the description of the Brown Brothers Cigar Company logo and the brand of this cigar was Carmenita. It is possible that before they changed the name to Carmencita, they used Carmenita. Possible? Yes. And possible that it was changed from Carmencita to Carmenita after losing the case. It's also possible that both names were used interchangeably, but I have no hard proof of that. In any case, it is a fact that in 1901, the Brown Brothers Cigar Company sold their cigar factory to the American Cigar Company. It also stated that the building occupied by the factory was not sold but leased for 10 years to the American Cigar Company. J.H. Brown of Brown Brothers Cigar Company was kept on to manage the cigar factory, and he decided to retire in 1902. This ignited a strike by the female workers who wanted him reinstated. I cannot confirm if he returned, but he did state that it was his desire to retire. I can only imagine that J.H. Brown was a kind manager and the women felt his loss. In 1903, it can be confirmed that J.H. Brown engineered a plan for the organization of $1 million independent cigar company along with other prominent cigar men. How did that work out? I don't know. I really don't. But what it does say about this cigar, well, I can tell you this much. It seems that this cigar is going to be dated between 1891 and 1903. I'm leaning more towards the 1903. My guess is that the label went through some name changes for various reasons. It was a successful brand from Detroit that had its heyday in the sun only to fade away as the company was sold. The mention of Havana tobacco and Sumatran wrapper in the descriptions for this cigar indicate the normal blend that was used at the time. So I'm going to assume that that's the makeup of the cigar. And everything else is going to remain a mystery. So Sumatran wrapper, don't know about the binder. Cuban Havana filler, 100%. Now this second cigar here is the Royal Jamaica Duchess cigar. And you can see Jamaica Tobacco Company Limited. And this is, of course, a very famous Jamaican brand that enjoyed a lot of success during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Now, this cigar has been dated as anywhere between the 1940s and the 1960s. I'm going to say that this cigar was probably something that you would have found in the late 40s to the early 50s and up until the 1960s. Small, petite Corona. Actually, it's not even a petite Corona. It's just a petite. And the third cigar, this is a Cuban Partagas Petite Bouquet. And this cigar was very popular in the late 60s up until the 1970s. It was discontinued in 2003, believe it or not. It is machine made. This is machine made as well. This is hand rolled. This is pre-machine. They're all little cigars. This is using a natural wrapper. This, believe it or not, is using a homogenized wrapper. And this little guy right here is using a natural wrapper. And this natural wrapper was placed over the binder and filler with a machine. I'll explain. Now, I started off with the Carmenita, Elegantes, and it's just a miracle for me to look at this little cigar and just tell you that it's providing a good amount of satisfaction in the few minutes that I've had it on. There's a mustiness, but there are spices and a little bit of pepper. There's also creaminess. There's nothing overly complex here, but what I love off the bat is that I'm not getting any cardboard whatsoever. I'm getting real tobacco flavor here. Now the burn line's a little wonky, and I've had to touch it up once or twice. Do not, I repeat, do not use triple torches on vintage cigars. You can, but you have to be extremely careful, and a mistake can happen. I myself have fallen victim to that. I suggest getting yourself a single flame torch. Yes, you can use spills if you like, if you want to get romantic like that, you can do that. But I say that only because the wrapper's so old. Overall, the cigar is so old. You just don't want to hit it with too much flame too quickly at such a high burn rate, such a high heat is what I meant to say. So that's where this cigar is at. Yeah, it's just a nice dry spice in the finish, a little creaminess, a little pepper in the finish as well, some cedar. These came out of a box, by the way. They came out of a cedar box. I think it was a cedar box. But they did come out of a box, so they were well preserved. They were not in cellophane. Now, if I'm correct about the timeline for this particular cigar, being in the early 1900s, whether it's 1903 or 1910, this cigar is well over 100 years old. Well over 100 years old. Potentially 117 years old. And it's burning fine, tasting great. Smooth, creaminess mixed with spice and cedar. Just now, I got a little bit of like a sharp cedar note on the tongue, but it's not hampering the smoke at all. I say, 100 years does not necessarily mean you can't get around town and do what you got to do. And this particular cigar is doing what it's got to do, and that is providing me with satisfaction and flavor. Much to my surprise, because really, honestly, at 100 years old, you don't know what you're going to get. You really don't. Man, that Carmenita was exquisite 100-year-old tobacco. If I do dare say so myself, that was exceptional. For me, I thought that was a good great vintage cigar smoking experience. The next cigar is none other than the Royal Jamaica Duchess Cigarrillo. Because, I mean, this is in the Cigarrillo format here. It's tiny. I didn't need to cut the top. It was already cut for me. And it's a tiny, tiny cigar. A lot of mustiness so far. But let me tell you a little something about the Jamaican cigars. And I know that we did the rise and the fall of Jamaican tobacco. Some of you have seen it. It's a lot of history behind the Jamaican cigar industry and their work. But I was reading in the Transatlantic, Transcultural, and Transnational Dialogues on Identity by Lori Celaya and Sonja Stevenson Watson, which was published in 2021. And it details the immigration of Cubans to Jamaica. So Cubans first started going to Jamaica in the 1850s. Okay, they arrived there and basically they set up shop. They started some small production of tobacco. This all happened, but every time that there was a revolution of sorts, some kind of political unrest in Cuba, Cubans would hop on over to Jamaica and set up shop there and make a life there. So, case in point, the 1868 10 Years' War was a war that spurred a lot of Cubans to go to Jamaica. But it wasn't really until the Cuban War of Independence in 1895 to 1898 that you really saw an uptick in Cubans going to Jamaica. And Cubans would flee to Jamaica constantly. So it wasn't a surprise that there were some tobacco manufacturing going on in Jamaica. Now, mind you, Jamaica had been growing tobacco since the early 1900s anyway. But Cubans heading there obviously boosted their operations, and the quality of the tobacco got even better. Now, by 1871, there were about 202 tobacconists and cigar makers in Kingston, Jamaica. What's the cigarrillo like? It's a little salty. It's mild. No cardboard. No negative descriptions of the finish. Everything is positive so far. But when Jamaican tobacco really took off was really during World War II. Cuba could not sell their Cuban cigars to England. England had put a freeze on the American dollar. And so that was what Cuba accepted as payment. So England looked to Jamaica. They saw the fertile valleys, the fertile soil. They saw and knew that there had been Cubans that had moved there and set up shop. They knew that there was enough tobacco being produced mainly for the local areas. and some for exportation, but it wasn't on a big scale. But that needed to change, and England was going to make sure that that changed. And the reason for the change, oh, that last one was creamy. The reason for the change really was that if they didn't have Jamaica, which was a colony at the time, mind you, to rely on, then they were going to have to rely on Dutch cigars. And Dutch cigars mainly used Burmese tobacco, Indian tobacco, some Brazilian tobacco, not the kind of tobaccos that the English smoker was accustomed to. And mind you, the English smoker, or Brits for that matter, were experts in smoking cigars, but not making them. They had a few home grown tobacco business cigar companies by a couple of people. You had Calvallo, Maniquian, and I believe King Six, which was some local English tobacco companies. Not much can be said about the level of their quality. Not much is known, at least not by me, not yet. But that wasn't really the focus. The focus for me was to talk about the Jamaican tobacco that's in this particular cigar. Really good. Now this particular little cigarillo is dated from the 1940s to the 1960s. My best guess for this particular Vitola size, this particular cigar, was probably 1950s to 1960s. I think this is the type of cigar that took off after the war. Why do I say that? Well, it's machine made, for one. It's machine made. And the rise of the machine made cigarrillos, little cigars, or regular cigars for that matter, was really in the late 40s after the war, ramping up in the 50s and going into full gear by the 60s and 70s. So a little cigar like this would have been something that the Royal Jamaica would have released probably, I'm just guessing here, late 40s, early 50s. And I say that with a lot of research that I've done on the cigar because, and on Royal Jamaica as well as Jamaican tobacco, and the state of the cigar industry at that point in time. You know, the English, well as Churchill, fell so much in love with the Jamaican tobacco and Jamaican cigars that even when they started importing Cuban tobacco in 1953 again, people were still looking for the Jamaican cigars, and they were a major competitor to the Cuban brands, even upon the return of the beloved Cuban tobacco. Now, you gotta understand something. That first cigar that I introduced you to, the Carmenita, which was hand-rolled, wasn't machine-rolled. It was hand-rolled. It was a small cigar. In the beginning, when there was this switch over to the machines, they were still trying to use a natural wrapper or a combo sometimes, eventually, because they wanted to mimic the handmade product. But the problem was that the machines were tearing at the delicate wrapper paper. So eventually the switch to homogenized wrapper was just inevitable. And some companies, again, while still trying to maintain that real cigar handmade feel, added binders, and then eventually no binders. And even before they switched over to the homogenized wrapper leaf, the homogenized binder came first. They were working with homogenized binders. Then they were working with a mixture of natural wrapper and homogenized wrapper, and then homogenized wrapper, and then no binder or a natural binder. They were grasping at straws. They were just trying to come up with something that would work, cost effective, and really please the consumer. Now, the war was great for the Jamaican tobacco industry. The war was perfect for them. They got a big boost. They got world attention. But till this day, all of those brands are gone. The only one that remains is Macanudo. And Macanudo is now made in the Dominican Republic. But in 2014, Macanudo actually released a limited edition of cigars using only Jamaican filler. So you had that. I missed those. So I missed a chance to get a hold of those. But going back to the machine-made little cigars, you know, when the Cubans started making cigars in Jamaica, along with the Jamaicans, it wasn't all Cubans, it was Jamaicans as well, their emphasis was really to just use the Jamaican tobacco as filler, not wrapper. They were using Havana wrapper. Now, in this particular cigar, I can't tell you that it is a Havana wrapper. My guess is more that this is a homogenized leaf, possibly no binder, and the filler in here is Jamaican. There's also the possibility that this could be a Cuban homogenized leaf, because the Cubans got into it as well. And we're gonna get that. We're gonna get to that next. The first cigar burned rather quickly. It was a 10-15 minute cigar, and I didn't really expect it to be much more than that. This cigar, while smaller, packed with less tobacco obviously, is burning at a slower rate. Is it because of the age? Could be. Is it because of the way it was preserved in a cellophane? It's also something that could have played a part. It reminds me a little bit of Cuban tobacco. It does. It has the saltiness. It has earthiness. The cigar is burning fine. No issues with this little baby at all. It's a little cigar. It really is. But it's really providing the satisfaction of a larger ring gauge cigar. I know that's hard to believe. It really is hard to believe, even for me, as I sit here and I smoke it. But it's true. Wow. All done with that Jamaican cigar, and let me tell you, I really don't see any cigarrillo on the market today that would top that experience. In flavor, it was just started off with creaminess. It gave you some earthiness. It gave you some smooth pepper. I mean, it was just medium-bodied cigar, straight up, full of flavor for such a little cigar. Now we come to the final one. I don't know if I'm saving the best for last. I can't say that. I'm going in order of age. And so this one, more than likely from the 1970s, possibly late 60s, more likely the early 70s. When, Cuba got involved in the machine making trade sometime in the late 50s, I believe. But it wasn't until much later that they really ramped up production of little cigars and machine-made cigars, which were also sometimes little cigars. This one is not the largest of the three, mind you. The first one was the largest of the three in regards to how much tobacco was in it. This looks like a hand roll, could be a hand roll, but more than likely is just a machine-made little cigar using some natural wrapper leaf. And that's why it looks so much like a hand roll. I doubt there is a binder in here. And this is, of course, coming from the Partagas factory. Partagas Petite Bouquet. Now, the first two cigars were pretty drying in the finish. Really dried the palate out. The first cigar, the Carmenita, was a long filler use of Cuban tobacco. The Jamaican one, I'm unsure whether it was long filler Jamaican or short filler Jamaican. Couldn't say. This one, I can assure you that it is short filler Cuban tobacco. Right now, the draw is a little conservative. The band is up a little bit higher than I would like, but I was fidgeting with it, and I can see that it just set where it's set. And I'm afraid that if I mess with it too much, it may affect the wrapper. So I'm going to leave it be. Draw just opened up. It's smooth, only slightly creamy. It's been said that the tobacco from the Partagas factories, that the tobacco that they use is amongst the best in the world, has always been and continues to be. It's what you hear, it's what you read. I can say that a lot of my Cuban Partagas cigars have aged extremely well, and they do so well under aging, even when you've had them after 10 years or so. In this case, it's a little different because we're talking about short filler. We're not talking about the long filler premium stuff that's used in their regular production cigars. And why did they discontinue it in 2003? We don't know. Perhaps it just wasn't worth it anymore to continue to make these cigars when the trend was going now towards larger cigars. Just an idea. I'm getting the zing of some spice in this cigar, but I'm also getting a nice mellow, smooth tobacco flavor. Traces of the saltiness are there as well. For a short filler cigar, so far, it's pretty outstanding. I wanted you to see the cigar a little more up close. As you can see where the band is resting, it's a little bit up there for comfort, but I've managed so far. The burn line has been very sharp, very good. It's kind of coned, but it's fine. It's actually burning quite well. And like you see this cigar, we're talking about a cigar that is a little over 50 years old, and it's burning quite well, and it's retained a good amount of flavor. Of the three cigars, this has probably been the closest to full-bodied, but not necessarily the most flavored. I felt there was more flavor in the 100-year-old cigar than in this cigar, for sure. I also found it to be, or I'm finding it to be, that it was a better cigar than this cigar. Nonetheless, this is Partagas. It's short filler, probably the short filler left over from the long filler, right? It's maintained a lot of the Cuban characteristics, the saltiness, and the finish, the pepperiness, spiciness, because I'm getting a lot of spice in the finish. Ladies and gentlemen, I have come to my final summary and conclusion of these three little cigars, which all had an impact, which were all devoured by the cigar consumer at different stages, in different points in history. My favorite was the Carmenita from 1903. My second favorite was the Royal Jamaican Duchess Cigarillo. And this, the third favorite, it's last, but it still offered a good amount of satisfaction. I just think that for me, the way that 100-year-old cigar matured and developed over the course of time was just extraordinary and impossible to ignore. The Jamaican cigar was incredibly surprising that it was such a true medium and still packed with flavor. This one probably has a little bit more flavor because it's bolder and it has more strength. But just judging it, it's a little harsher in the finish. It's a lot spicier than the first two, and that's just preference there, because if you're somebody that prefers more spice, then you're probably going to rank this one. I'm still going to say you're not going to rank it over the first one, but you'll probably rank it over the Jamaican one. Excellent, excellent. All three, excellent. And I just want to thank you all again for joining me on Backyard Cigars. Until next time.